Are we starting?
We are.
Okay. From the Texas mom on Twitter, wow, voice. On Twitter, who believes in stronger immigration policy, to major right-leaning news outlets. Many with a mere semblance of conservative ideology have been deplatformed, shadow banned, and exiled by Silicon Valley and the major communications arms they control. So how do we fight back against this Orwellian overreach of power and censorship? By throwing a panel at the Newseum.
Woo!
Joining us today is Jim Hoft, the founder and editor-in-chief of the Gateway Pundit, a prominent conservative website based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Ranked fourth most influential conservative news site by Harvard University and the Columbia Journalism Review. We have Pam Geller. Pam Geller is the president of the American Freedom Defense Initiative, publisher of the Geller Report, and author of the best-selling book Fatwa. We have Marlene Yackel, an Atlanta-based scientist and software engineer who specializes in AI, machine learning, and development on Google and Apple's platforms. We do not have Oleg. We do have Margaret Howell, however. Margaret currently heads Right Side Broadcasting Network as their DC bureau chief. She holds a master's degree in legislative politics from George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management and a BA from GW University. And with that, let's get this show on the road.
Great, thanks, Lucian. Thanks everybody for being here today. My name is Jim Hoft. I'm the founder of Gateway Pundit. Back in 2004, we were a little blog that I started out of reaction of the liberal media, and that I was disgusted with what I was reading on the media, so I started Little Gateway Pundit. I had 2 readers at the time, my twin brother and an engineer friend of mine. Today, within the past couple of weeks, we've been averaging nearly 1 million readers, page views a day. So we've grown quite a bit. During the election in 2016, we were one of the early websites to jump on the Trump train. We supported Donald Trump. We were open about that. We didn't disguise it. We were one of the few websites that actually supported Trump, which is quite shocking at the time. And through the election, there were a few of us. Drudge Report was big on Donald Trump, so was Pamela Geller's site, the Geller Report. So was InfoWars and Zero Hedge and Conservative Treehouse and Breitbart. And what we found after the election was that a small group of reporters and a few websites, what we were able to do was the studies, as Lucian mentioned in the opening. Harvard did a study and Columbia Journalism Review did a study, and they found that on the conservative side of news, for people who are conservative in America, the winning side, by the way, they went online to get their news. If you looked at the size of influence on the conservative side, it was Breitbart, which was hugely impactful. Fox News was number 2. The Hill, which plays both sides, was number 3. And Gateway Pundit, this small little blog, was number 4 in influence. That tells you, and I want to emphasize this, it tells you that conservatives today in America have finally, after years of abuse, after decades of abuse, they have turned away from the mainstream media. They've had enough of this disgusting bias that they report. They've had enough of them omitting stories, refusing to report stories, and so they went other places to get their news. I was in a conference in Prague, Czech Republic, in 2007, and George Bush spoke to a bunch of dissidents from all these countries. It was at the Voice of America headquarters in Prague. And what I found and what they told me at the time was when the Soviet Union was around, of course we knew it collapsed, but when the Soviet Union was around and all of their satellite countries, people there would listen. They wanted to get the truth. They knew they weren't getting the truth from their establishment media, so they went to find Voice of America. And eventually, the government would shut that channel down. So Voice of America and Liberally Free Europe would have to change channels. And the people always found the channels because people want to hear the truth. And so what happened in 2016 was that people went to different sources, different media outlets to find the truth. And so since the election, George Soros actually funded one of these studies at Harvard, I believe it was. His Open Societies funded that story, or that report. And then Columbia Journalism Review, probably the most esteemed journalism school in America, they both put out similar reports. The left is still going to the mainstream media to get their facts. The right is going other places. Since the election, they're cracking down on us. They know where the influence is, and I wish that Republican lawmakers knew where the influence is coming, who are on their side, who they can count on, where the truth is coming out. Because the people are finding the truth, and the left is trying to shut us down. And some conservative politicians, Republicans, need to stand up now. Because if they don't, we're all going to be squashed out of existence. Since the election, my Facebook traffic has been significantly impacted. As our traffic continues to grow at Gateway Pundit, we notice that our Facebook traffic each month continues to go down. This wasn't just because one algorithm or one change they made last week. This is because it's been happening. We've been targeted for the past year. We also noticed that, and I have a great reporter, Cassandra Fairbanks, who put up a story last week. And it was about how Black Lives Matter was going to target the Super Bowl. And we put it up on Facebook. And so the other thing they're doing is they have fact checkers, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact checkers last week said that Cassandra's story was not good. It was not, this is going to be fake news, essentially is what they called it. And so they didn't let people see this story. Well, some of you may know, if you followed the conservative media, you know that on Super Bowl Sunday, Black Lives Matter did disrupt the Super Bowl. They shut down the train line going to the stadium. So we were right, and the fact checkers were wrong, and we have no recourse. If they block one of our stories, which happens to be the truth, we have nowhere to go. And we don't have people to communicate with. We can't fight these decisions they make. We're finding also, like with Google this year, they've done different things to crack down on our traffic. We have people writing us saying, hey, I used to find you on Google on the front page if I put in Gateway. Now you're way back on the fourth page. We found people who looked up Gateway Pundit for a month here or so. They were getting a little box that would pop up and say, here's some disputed articles for Gateway Pundit. They did the same thing with Daily Caller and Breitbart, but isn't it interesting? This didn't happen to any sites on the left. So these are the sort of tricks that we're having to deal with, and if we don't stand up, what's going to happen is we're going to have these people. Right now we have the left. They want to crack down on fake news. They're having hearings in Congress, having hearings in Europe to crack down on fake news. That means one thing. They want to crack down on conservative news, because that's where it's going to lead, and there's going to be no voices out there, and America will be without our freedom of speech. This is a catastrophe. This is a tragedy that this is happening in America. So I'm very pleased today to be with some great panelists who have their own story to tell, and who have a lot of courage to coming here today. I had some people who were invited, and they decided not to come, and that's fine. But I had some really people of integrity stand up and say, I'll speak the truth today. So I really appreciate that. And the next thing we were going to do is our friend Michelle Malkin. She's been in the conservative movement for years. She's a leading voice. She's very popular. If you ever go to a conference and Michelle is speaking and she's signing books, there's a line a block long to see this woman. She's phenomenal. She's brilliant. And today she sent us in a video that I hope you will enjoy. And so we're going to cue that up. And it's Michelle Malkin, who wanted to be here. She couldn't schedule it. And so now she's sent in a video.
Hi, I'm Michelle Malkin. Although I started in the Metro newspaper business in 1992, my years as an independent conservative blogger and internet entrepreneur have been the most journalistically enriching. I launched my first website in 1999, my namesake blog in 2004, my first group blog, Hot Air, and my YouTube channel in 2006, my Twitter account in 2008, and my second group website, Twitchy, in 2012. Early adopter status was important for non-leftists who saw the disruptive influence and narrative-setting opportunities that new media and social media offered. I was ridiculed by mainstream media colleagues for wasting time on the internet, derided as just a blogger, and mocked for starting a Twitter aggregation business before everyone else, including Twitter itself, copied the idea. But you can't win the game if you're not on the playing field. Now, recent revelations by industry insiders about how social justice progressives embedded in the tech world have rigged the alternative media playing field are no surprise to those of us who've been here from the start. I want to share 3 incidents that may help shed light on the current censorship campaign online that threatens true diversity of ideas in the social media marketplace. Number 1. In 2006, YouTube yanked down my 2-minute, innocuous, harmless, non-violent, non-profane, non-hateful, and non-threatening video called First They Came. It spotlighted authors, editors, politicians, and other targets of Islamic intolerance and violence. Among those featured in the video on radical Islam's war on Western free speech, Theo van Gogh, the Dutch filmmaker murdered by jihadist Mohammed Bouhieri for his outspoken criticism of Muslim misogyny. Salman Rushdie, whom the Ayatollah Khomeini cast a fatwa upon after he published the blasphemous The Satanic Verses. Oriana Fallaci, the fiery journalist put on trial in Italy for defaming Islam, and the editors of the Danish Jyllands-Posten newspaper who faced death threats for publishing cartoons of Muhammad, which prompted violent riots and terror plots around the world. I contrasted the plight of those killed with the hordes of Muslim protesters in London's safe spaces, fearlessly waving their signs demanding that the faithful behead all those who insult Islam and exterminate those who slander Islam. YouTube informed me that the video contained, quote, inappropriate content. I complained across social media, posting additional YouTube videos calling attention to the ban. But First They Came stayed deep-sixed on my YouTube channel. Other bloggers and video consumers tried to subvert the censors by toasting the clip on their sites. It became a game of whack-a-mole as the YouTube police hunted it down. Counter-jihad activists nicknamed YouTube JihadTube or DimiTube to mock the censors' acquiescence to Islamist restrictions on acceptable speech by infidels. Meanwhile, Islamic radicalization videos festered on the site and continue to fester to this day. 3 pieces in the New York Times covered my skirmish over the little video. Reporter Tom Zeller Jr. reported that YouTube had emailed him a statement suggesting that my video, quote, violated the company's terms of service. YouTube also told the newspaper, quote, our customer support team reviews all flagged videos before removing them. The statement, quote, specifically referred to the part of the YouTube user agreement that forbids users from submitting material that is, quote, unlawful, obscene, defamatory, libelous, threatening, pornographic, harassing, hateful, racially or ethnically offensive, or encourages conduct that would be considered criminal offense, give rise to civil liability, violate any law, or is otherwise inappropriate. George Washington University law professor Jeffrey Rosen wrote in a New York Times Magazine article on Google's gatekeepers that he watched the First They Came video, which, quote, struck me as a powerful political commentary that contains neither hate speech nor graphic violence, and I asked why it was taken down. According to a YouTube spokesman, the takedown was a routine one that hadn't been reviewed by higher-ups. Only after receiving unusually fair exposure in the New York Times did the video magically reappear on my channel. Number 2. In 2007, YouTube yanked another of my videos. This time it was an episode of my show Vent for Hot Air. I exposed Universal Music Group hip-hop artist Akon as a misogynist and included excerpts from Akon's vulgar music videos as well as on-stage video footage showing him sexually abusing a teenage girl at a nightclub in Trinidad. UMG claimed that my video podcast infringed its copyrights and submitted a takedown notice under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, pressuring YouTube to pull the episode down. This was a clear attempt to suppress my video by abusing the DMCA. And it just happened to turn out that YouTube and UMG had a corporate relationship, or strategic partnership, as they called it. With pro bono legal support from the Internet Civil Liberties group, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I filed a counter notice with YouTube. Thanks to added pressure from the conservative blogosphere and publicity from radio host Laura Ingraham, UMG backed down and withdrew the notice. But after receiving the notification from YouTube that the video would be restored, we discovered a new message in place of the video. YouTube claimed that my ACON report now violated its terms of use. After EFF senior staff attorney Kurt Opsahl took the matter directly to one of Google YouTube's in-house counsels, YouTube reinstated the video, overruling the prior terms of use decision. As the EFF pointed out, UMG wielded a, quote, bogus copyright claim against me to squelch video criticism of one of its superstars. YouTube helped trump my First Amendment fair use rights by appeasing a corporate partner until we fought back and blew the whistle. Number 3, not long after launching Twitchy, my tweet aggregation site, we heard from countless conservative users whose accounts were suspended after being targeted by left-wing trolls who falsely marked their adversaries as spam. This speech-squelching mob tactic was dubbed Twitter Gulag. Instead of abandoning the playing field, conservatives on Twitter banded together to expose the flag-spamming swarms. Initially, we were laughed at, but Twitter was forced to respond and reinstate victims. Now fast forward to 2018, a half dozen years later. The Twitter Gulag practice that we battled in 2012 ominously foreshadowed the far more nefarious and systemic shadow banning practices perpetrated by liberal Twitter engineers themselves against conservatives and Trump supporters. In the past, my experiences showed me that there were a few good and principled First Amendment advocates on the left. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, Jeffrey Rosen and Tom Zeller at the New York Times, for example, who were willing to speak up for the free speech of all online. But those rare unicorns have grown even rarer on the polarized, politicized platforms built by Silicon Valley militants who preach about the open internet while facilitating the censorship and targeting of those with views with which they disagree. I got into journalism and onto new media because I believe more and better speech is always the answer to false and flawed speech. In my skirmishes with the speech squelchers over the past dozen years, the most effective strategies have involved relentless exposure of the First Amendment hypocrites and their double standards, information sharing and organizing among targets, and a stubborn commitment to stay on the field. Do not yield. Ultimately, diversity is not our greatest strength. Unity in the face of retributive censorship is. Hi, I'm Michelle.
And now Margaret Howell from Right Side Broadcasting is going to speak.
Well, thank you for having me. I see so many faces in here that have been part of a movement, and it's an honor to be in this group and on the stage talking to you about something that's so important to me, which is liberty, our right to speak out, our right to be free and have a free press. I started in this business in 2013. I began working for RT News, and later went to Moscow, Russia, and worked for RT International. I was on the ground there a lot, covering everything from suicide bombings to EU overstaffed, you name it. And I was watching a program called Alex Jones, and he was the only one accurately reporting on a suicide bombing that I was reporting on at the same time. And I contacted Alex and said, "Can I work for you?" Several months later. Joined with Alex right at the start of the 2016 election, where we were able to hammer Hillary Clinton day in and day out. And like many of you, helped usher in a Trump victory. I now head up Right Side Broadcasting here in Washington, D.C., and the censorship that I have seen happen to us over the past year is nothing like I've ever witnessed before in the past 6 years of doing this kind of work. As many of you know, our RSBN, as we call it, was born out of a frustration. We were covering then candidate Trump and his rallies, and the frustration was that mainstream media, they just weren't panning the crowd. They weren't showing an accurate crowd size. When they were reporting on it, they were taking snippets of what candidate Trump was saying, and they were twisting it, contorting it. And Joe Seals, who founded Right Side, whom I was introduced to because he was a guest on InfoWars, I was so impressed with what he was doing. He was attending these rallies and showing the crowd size, giving the speech in length, a full speech, which wasn't being done before, if you can believe it. They were taking snippets to contort what the president was saying, candidate was saying at the time. Joe wanted us to be able to see a full context and be able to judge for ourselves, taking the mainstream media and that fake narrative out of it. RSBN then began simulcasting along with President Trump's rallies to his campaign Facebook page, live streaming, in addition to the campaign's Facebook page, our own YouTube channel, and eventually reaching over 300 million in an audience and really taking part in the Trump victory. An example of that, RSBN was working with President Trump, the campaign, during the 2016 election cycle and that famous Las Vegas debate that took place. We were able to live stream that, giving pre-shows and post-shows on the campaign's Facebook page. And that night raised alone, I believe, $10 million for his campaign. We began getting a lot of national media attention. RSBN did at that time. The Washington Post labeled us as Trump TV. And several publications began doing profiles on us that were very, very, how should I say, it's not nice. Media Matters in particular was one of them, who called us, they did a playbook, and they called it Media Outlets Poised to Become Trump's Personal Propaganda Machine. Now, they had clearly orchestrated a hit against this little YouTube channel that you would think wouldn't have threatened them at all, or anyone for that matter. Now this led, we believe, to social media sites, our social media sites being censored, and we weren't sure, and Joe and I were talking about this, my boss, earlier, if people at Facebook and YouTube just happen to read Media Matters, or if somebody at Media Matters is in cahoots. We weren't really sure if it was the chicken or the egg which came first, but regardless, they started censoring us. And we took the time to write down just a couple of examples about how we've been hit, and in the hardest way. So Facebook, they've removed several of our live videos, even White House press briefings, which you would think would be innocuous. They don't have a political message to them. They're simply a White House press briefing that we cover and saying that the video violated their terms of service. So they would remove an actual White House press briefing that we would be live streaming. No additional explanation was given by Facebook, and this happened at least 20 times. That I've counted, not just on White House press briefings, but all kinds of videos, absolutely nonpartisan news that we would be covering, they would censor us. YouTube, censoring us in the search results. So we found that we have almost 300,000 subscribers. We are a growing channel, and a lot of our money was coming from YouTube prior to what's happening to us now. We've lost over 95% of our ad revenue. Even though we have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, we're getting search placements in YouTube that are way down the list. We're seeing channels that don't have nearly the subscriber base that we have. They're getting views that are tens and thousands more than ours are for the exact same content. We're clearly being censored in the search results. The end result in many times of our coverage is that we receive just a tiny fraction of what we know is watching. Also, our videos have been marked, and I want to make sure I get this right, quote, not suitable for most advertisers on YouTube, meaning that we can't make any ad revenue from the video streaming that we're doing. So basically, any video with the word Trump in it that we put up, even though we correctly tag it, we correctly label it, we correctly title it, they've taken away our ability to have any sort of ad revenue. And this little nugget, which is probably my favorite that they're doing to us, it's unbelievable, but it's absolutely true. YouTube is censoring our actual broadcast and live. They're putting a black screen for several seconds so that our viewers will actually leave. They think that our content has stopped, or they think that there's something wrong with the stream. We've reached out to YouTube, and they simply say that we're having technical difficulties. It's the only information that they've given us regarding what's happening. The screen will go black. It happens every time we break news, every time it happens with Trump rallies that we cover live. And of course, Trump's speeches, they love to do those for about 30 seconds with a black screen and simply their logo. This has caused many of our viewers to leave our stream in droves. We've absolutely decimating our channel. And then of course we have Google. Google has removed our ability for us to place AdSense advertisements on our own website, which is amazing if you think about it. 10% of our monthly revenue would come from Google Ads. And we've appealed to Google, we've been denied. No explanation is ever given. So we haven't gotten an explanation from Facebook, YouTube, or Google. And because of this censorship, like I said before, 95% of our revenue, of our income has been totally wiped out. So from 2016, where we were thriving, absolutely thriving, and able to live stream for an incredibly popular president, we're now seeing ourselves, in a sense, shadow banned, wiped, and no explanation, of course, has been given. So we're struggling to stay alive. We're hoping that we can address this, and if we can't circumvent it, at least make enough people aware of what's happening to us so that our channel stays in existence and we can continue covering President Trump in real time, exactly what he's saying, all of what he's saying, showing who's showing up in a room. And I can't tell you how many rallies we've covered where thousands of people are wrapped around blocks for hours just waiting to get a glimpse of what was candidate Trump and now President Trump. It's an honor to cover it and to not only display a movement, but to display the real sentiment of American people. I'm very simple myself. I come from Kentucky. We value our First Amendment and our Second Amendment, I can tell you, with unbelievable fortitude. It's an honor to do this, and it's really concerning to me as a reporter who loves liberty, who loves freedom, to see this happening to us in 2018 now, and we're hoping that this panel sheds some light on it, and we want Congress to address this. So that's what we're doing here. You're welcome.
I think the next, before Pamela speaks, and Lucian will introduce Pamela, but we had another guest who wanted to be here. He's actually traveling, he told me this week, to Oregon, New Hampshire, Florida, and so he couldn't be here. He supports this cause. James O'Keefe, of course, is a national treasure. Mm-hmm. He's exposed so many things since he's been around. 2009 was really his breakthrough year when he exposed Acorn and had them shut down, this corrupt group that was getting millions of dollars funding from our government. Recently, in 2018, he disclosed and exposed how Twitter is shadow banning conservatives. It was a brilliant expose. James, if there was justice in this world, James would be winning Pulitzer Prizes. He's just an amazing asset to the conservative cause. And he couldn't be here, but he did send in a video, so we're going to play the video now.
Hello everyone, this is James O'Keefe from Project Veritas. I'm so sorry that I cannot be with you in person. We are working on many undercover investigations this year. We're out there changing the world, but my friend and colleague Jim Hoft wanted me to say a few words about a recent investigation. I know and I hope that most of you have actually seen it. Blockbuster investigation into Twitter released last month into Twitter exposing a shocking bias, how they censor conservative voices. They admit to shadow banning. They admitting to have an anti-Trump agenda. So watch as these Twitter insiders reveal ugly truths about the social media giant.
So you're not a Trump lover?
No. We're more than happy to help the Department of Justice in their little investigation.
Okay.
So,
how?
Basically giving every single tweet that he's posted.
Okay.
Even the ones he's deleted.
Okay.
Any direct messages.
Good.
Any mentions. Creepy good brother. I mean, it's like a level, like I don't want to say freaks me out, but it disturbs me.
So how does Twitter respond to this senior network security engineer saying how scary it is what they're doing? They say that he's speaking in, quote, a personal capacity. Yeah, right. So what does Project Veritas do? We release some dozen more Twitter engineers, some dozen more rogue Twitter engineers, also talking about how the company censors people, how biased they are, basically admitting what we've suspected to be the case for a long time.
Let's go to a random tweet and like just look at the followers. They'll all be like guns, God, America. Like with the American flag or like the cross. Yeah, no, really. Like who says that? Who talks like that? It's for sure a bot.
One strategy is to shadow ban so that you have ultimate control. The idea of a shadow ban is that you ban someone but they don't know they've been banned because they keep posting but no one sees their content.
I've heard talk that it's a good thing because they'll use it to ban like Trump supporters or conservatives. So I didn't know if like that's just a rumor or if that's true.
That's a thing.
That's a thing?
That's a thing. Yeah.
So the videos caused a storm of controversy. Twitter was forced to respond again and again, this time denying everything, but starting to look a little panicked after getting some comments and some questions by the mainstream media. Then we released a video showing Twitter's unbelievable invasion of privacy, and by this time it no longer became a political thing, but a thing that almost everyone, including millennials, can relate to, and that's what type of private messages they're looking through, mining through your private data, messages you may send to your boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband. This is really unbelievable stuff.
So we're putting on the disguise for tonight's meeting with Clay. We're just changing the hair up a little bit. We're going to be putting on some glasses, and we're going to be going to the steakhouse to meet with Clay and talk politics.
I've seen way more penises than I ever want to see in my life.
On DM messages?
DMs, tweets, yes. Lots of dicks.
There's teams dedicated to it. I mean, we're talking 3 or 4, at least 3 or 4 people. Yes, they're paid to look at dick pics.
So everything you're saying is stored in my server. So
Oh shit!
exactly what you're saying.
Can I delete it?
You can. It's all on my server. So all your sex messages and your like dick pics are on my server.
No shit.
Yeah. All your illegitimate wives and like all the girls you've been f***ing around with, they're on my server now.
Oh my
I'm
god.
just your wife. I sue you in your divorce.
So by now the dams cracked on the mainstream media. BuzzFeed and Wired seem to deny the video content before their own eyes, publishing Twitter's denials as gospel, publishing these headlines as if it were actually what happened. Again, the mainstream media denying reality and promoting a false narrative. Where is in the virtue of them passing along untrue information? Aren't you supposed to challenge what these people tell you? That's what we do at Project Veritas, but these mainstream media outlets just reporting what they're told by Twitter brass, not reporting what is in the tapes. So just days after we release our 3rd video on Twitter, their chief operations officer, Anthony Noto, resigned. Twitter said the 2 events were not related. Yeah, right. The resignation was kind of sudden, took a lot of people by surprise. Total coincidence, right? So, anyways, as you can see, we're on to something big. This is going to be the first in a series of videos we do on big tech. It's part of our American Prophet series. We'll never be out of work at Project Veritas. We have a lot of sources coming to us. We're confirming what a lot of people suspect. Other companies are probably doing similar things, and it's amazing to see the reaction to these stories. And so thank you so much for this event, Jim. I appreciate what you do for our country. I appreciate you being an independent voice for citizen journalists. I wish you a great event, and stay tuned, because Project Veritas is just getting started.
That was fantastic. What a class act. Our next speaker then is Pamela Geller. She really doesn't need much of an introduction, but I can tell you this. A lot of us here, we get abused because we speak our truth. We speak what we believe politically. We're conservative in nature. As one of these Twitter engineers said, gun gods and the Bible and whatever else he said. But that's what a lot of us believe, and we just believe in this country. We love this country. Pamela loves this country, and she has stuck her neck out, and because of that, she continually gets death threats for speaking her truth and for reporting her truth to the masses. She has an amazing story. I hope someday we get to see the whole video of it, because Pamela's she's just an amazing woman and probably the most courageous person I know. Just recently, Pamela was called into court because there was a man who was claimed to be with ISIS, and he threatened to cut her head off. And they called this man, and Pamela went to the court when he had already been accused, and when they sentenced him as a character witness. And that says a lot about Pam, because she is a woman of great character. What the media is doing, what the left-wing tech companies are doing, is trying to smear this woman. And she's a woman of integrity, and she is a truth sayer. And it's just a shame that this Pamela is going through so much, and more people need to stand up for Pamela Geller. So.
Thank you, Jim. Light applause. First, I want to thank Jim for organizing this event, for my esteemed colleagues, both on the stage and in the audience. It's an exciting time to be in DC, something I never say, because, you know, this is where the great revolution happened with the election of President Trump. And it was the election of President Trump that escalated this war on free speech. After the election, where they thought they could not lose, and you see in everything that they've done with the Bison memo, they never thought they were going to be challenged. They never thought they were going to lose. And when they lost their minds. They said, how did this happen? How did this happen? We had everything. We had the media, we had movies, we had academia, we had public school, we had literature, we had the culture, we owned the zeitgeist. How did this happen? And so they looked around and they blamed websites like mine and Jim, talk radio, and they said, well, how do they get their message out there? Clearly the media is not giving us any air. Clearly the media is not, promoting our work. How do we get our message out? And it was through social media. I have 1.4 million followers on Facebook. My Pamela Geller account and Atlas Shrugs account has about 200K on Twitter, 70K on Instagram. This was how I got my message out. And I can tell you that a year ago, and I've long been targeted. I'm not going to go into every story, but it's a constant battle. And people say, let's start a new Facebook and let's start a new Twitter. No, I'm not going to cede the field. This is the public square. This is where people are exchanging ideas. I will not cede this field. And even if I thought that we should, you're never going to be as big as Facebook. It's never going to happen. It's a monopoly. And so I have long advocated for antitrust legislation. I believe that is the answer here. Because last year, because I've long been a target of social media, last year we filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice. Why the Department of Justice? Because under Section 230 of the Community Decency Act, FEC, they grant immunity to these social media giants, making it possible for them to discriminate against us and our free speech. And we had a setback. They said I don't have standing, but believe me, I've had how many free speech cases? I've won them all. This is going to be a long, drawn-out battle. But first we have to, I know people are filing suits, YouTube, the demonetization, which they did to me years ago. Google AdSense, which was 65% of my revenue, suspended my account as dangerous and derogatory. They're murdering. This is a form of murder. If they kill your ability to make a living, it's a form of murder. Facebook blocked my feed. So what happens is where all of my posts were going into my followers' feeds, they have to come to my page now. And that's just not what people do. Now you can try and break habits, but it's not realistic. Anyone who does this kind of work knows you got to shuck and jive. You got to ride the wave. So Facebook blocked my feed. Last week, they removed every post of mine ever on Facebook, 40,000 posts,
oh dear Lord,
and labeled my site as spam, which is their euphemism for fake news. And you couldn't even share a link. YouTube took my channel down after much big brouhaha on social media. They restored it, but this is, as you see, this is the tendency. People usually don't care if it's someone like Geller who gets banned or blocked. But I'm but the tip of the spear. I'm just the beginning. It doesn't end with me. It just begins with me. And when they get away with it, they keep moving the line in the sand. The social media giants are run by uniformly leftist corporate managers. And we see the silencing, the crushing of the freedom of speech. I'm not interested in their revenue, even though if you look at the numbers, it's incredible. Between Google and Facebook, they have, 70% of all ad revenue? That's a duopoly. I submit that Facebook and Twitter And YouTube is the public square. And just like last century, your telephone was your machine. That was how you communicate with people. Could you imagine if AT&T was listening in on your phone conversations and said, oh, they can't say that, and took away your telephone? It's the same thing. Your IP address is how you identify, it's how you communicate, it's the same thing. And what we need is government regulation. We need government intervention to ensure that Facebook and social media adheres to our free speech rights. Look, if you're inciting to murder, which by the way, I see plenty of on Facebook, that's one thing. But I don't know if you saw this experiment that this legal firm in Israel, Sharut Hadin, did, where they put up 2 pages, one a pro-Israel page and one a pro-Palestinian page. And they ran the exact same content. The pro-Israel page came down and the pro-Palestinian page stayed up. They're out of control, out of control. Never in recent history has so much immense power been in the hands of so few. These are the robber barons of 100 years ago. And look how the left vilified the robber barons. What makes these guys any groovier? Because they wear their flip-flops and turtlenecks and t-shirts? There's some kind of disconnect here. And we're really entering very dangerous territory. We are in trouble. Because for us, it's the reason why I started, it's the reason why I started a blog. I mean, I was completely apolitical before 9/11. And I felt guilty I didn't know who had attacked the country. And when I found out I felt guilty, I didn't understand the ideology. So I read the Quran, and Ibn Waraq, and Bat-She'or, and Robert Spencer, and Waqar Sultan. And increasingly, the media was not telling the story. They were adhering to the Sharia. They were adhering to the Sharia. You cannot criticize Islam. Do you know that Mark Zuckerberg sent his chief executive officer, Joel Kaplan, to Pakistan to meet with the Interior Minister, Chowdhury Khan, to assure him that they would adhere to their community standards and they would censor, scrub anything critical of Islam. Imagine this. Imagine the chief officer of a major American communications company is going to Pakistan. We're in trouble. Now, it's not too late by any stretch of the imagination, but I believe that we have to make this a big campaign issue. You know how they dictate, how the left dictates what the national conversation is? Why? Why are we talking about transgender bathrooms? Seriously. They become more and more absurd, and everybody is seriously considering this really absurd subject. This is really important. The freedom of speech is the foundation of any free society. Without it, a tyrant can rule unopposed. This is the most, in my estimation, yes, the number of death threats. Why? Because I violated speech laws, and that's what you're doing. And all of us are going to see increasingly you becoming inured to it. We're changing URLs. We're dancing as fast as we can. No. If President Trump is to have a shot in 20, we need to be free. We need to be able to use these public squares, which is what they are, and we have to build a coalition of freedom-loving peoples. And we have to get this done the way we got Trump done, is all I have to say. But I cannot impress upon you how critical this fight is. Once we lose it in social media, it's over. And you won't like what comes after America, I assure you. But thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Pam. I should have added, too, that when she went to testify this week or last week, the gentleman who threatened her, he was 28 years old, and they sentenced him to 28 years in jail. So that's pretty good news. He won't be after Pam anytime soon. Thank you, Pam. Our next speaker is Marlene Jekyll. She's an Atlanta-based scientist, a software engineer. She writes about Google and Apple's platforms, and she's a conservative, and she's concerned about, she's been an outspoken critic of ideological bias in technology industry. So she's a great panelist that we're glad she was able to show up today. So the floor is yours, Marlene.
Thanks for having me. Yes, like I said, I'm Marlene Jekyll, and you'll probably pick up a little bit of an accent. I'm going to explain a little bit of my background because that is relevant to the story, believe it or not. I'm a German South African, proudly American since 2001. I've been in tech since 2001 for a long time. I started out in Silicon Valley and spent many years there. And what I started to see is a change in the culture of Silicon Valley and a change in tech that started around 2009. And it's been very subtle, but it's becoming more obvious and more obvious to conservatives in tech. And as of 2016, I felt really compelled to start speaking out about some of the things that I was hearing and seeing. That people in tech companies that I've worked with that identify as conservative, that identify as libertarian, are terrified to speak out about some of what they're seeing in the tech companies. We started forming underground movements in tech where people are terrified to openly identify as Trump supporters. I was, in 2016, I kind of went from being not overly political, not overly involved in politics, to becoming more interested when the 2016 elections, the election campaigns really started. One thing that really moved me toward Trump was immigration reform. Being in the tech industry, one thing that was a big hot button for a lot of people was the number of H-1B visas that was taking over the tech industry. And we were concerned about that, and that initially drew me to Trump. And I started attending rallies and went to some Milo rallies, and that was really where I first started realizing how bad things have gotten, because when I started telling people that I was going to attend some of Milo Yiannopoulos events, I was warned by people that this was going to kill my career. And I, at first, did not believe how bad things had gotten until I started getting banned by forums that I belonged to, and getting people, talking with people that had similar views that I had, getting deplatformed from speaking at technical conferences, speaking at technical events. People completely having to silence themselves, being ostracized from careers that they love, that they spent decades building. Fast forward to January 2016, right before the inauguration, I had tweeted, kind of support for the inauguration, criticizing the Women's March, and subsequently I got banned from 2 women in tech organizations for no other reason other than being a Trump supporter and sharing conservative views on Twitter. I did not violate a code of conduct. I had very little interaction with them in any regard. Then, following the International Women's Day in March, I got banned from yet another organization for the same reason. The reasons that in each case that got cited to me was, we don't agree with your political views. I'm also a very open, anti-feminist, radical feminist critic, and certainly identify with a lot of the views that Christina Hoft Sommers had expressed. One of the issues that I think we've seen in tech in recent years is a radical feminist narrative where people are commenting on the wage gap, which is not nearly as much of an issue as people would like you to believe. Christina Hoft Sommers did a great job in her videos, The Factual Feminist, to debunk some of these things. I, again, supported her views and tweeted support for her. That became a big issue and a big source of contention for a lot of these groups. Then, yet again, fast forward a few months later, a very good friend of mine that I'm sure many of you will recognize and right away know exactly what I'm talking about, named James Damore, wrote the infamous Google memo. Now, when the story hit, what people in the general public don't realize is that there was a little bit of a backstory to that. James had written the memo in July, and it was shared internally inside Google. And approximately a week before the Google memo was leaked to Gizmodo, Jordan Peterson, very famous now academic that I'm sure most of you would also recognize, had his Google account deactivated, completely removed. Incidentally, he's one of the people that James had cited in the memo. So now we know by that time the memo had been making the rounds inside of Google. Google, of course, Google managers were very critical of that. And, coincidence? You tell me. Jordan's account was deactivated for no reason. He did contact Google support, they reinstated the account, but that was kind of the first time where I started seeing that this is really getting out of hand. Then I was involved with a group that is actually started by Google called the Google Women Tech Makers organization, which is international. And I was again banned and removed from this organization in September. The reasons that were given to me was my support and friendship with James Damore and expressing views that are harmful to gender equality. I was absolutely dumbfounded. Then I started hearing from people that I was being accused of stalking people. I was being accused of harassing people. At that point, they went after my company. I own a technology company in Atlanta that we've been doing very well with for the past 6-7 years. They were trying to literally shut my company down. And that's when I decided to fight back. And I decided to retain legal counsel. I hired a Republican, a conservative attorney, Harmeet Dillon, who's actually also representing James Damore, and we sent a cease and desist, including Google, to tell them that I am fighting back against defamation of character and torturous interference with my business. Because it is not okay to start silencing people. You have the right to disagree with my views. You do not have the right to shut my business down. Again, fast forward a few more months. In January, James Damore announced that he's doing a class action suit against Google. If you haven't read the document that has been available online, you can go and read it. It is about 200 pages of some of the most horrific things that you can see, because it shows the incredible ideological bias inside of Google against conservatives. He is filing suit against Google for discriminating against conservative white males inside the company. There is the anti-conservative narrative is just profound. It is absolutely shocking to see to what extent things have gotten. Now, one of the things that I've been fortunate with is my Twitter account is kind of small compared to most of the people on the stage, but I deliberately like it that way because it's allowed me to fly under the radar. And I have a lot of people that reach out to me and tell me what's going on in the technology industry, and people in different companies. I have a lot of sources inside Facebook, a lot of sources inside of Twitter. And as each of the panelists here were talking, I can relate to their stories, and what makes it interesting for me is coming from the technology side, and I can tell you that it's real. What is happening is real. It is not that hard to do through artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's not that hard to have algorithms in place to censor conservatives. It's not that hard to suppress search results and push it back down. It is not hard to do shadow banning. They are actively doing it. I know people that have confirmed that for me, inside sources that are scared to death of going public with what they know, but it is happening. What concerns me, and why a big reason as to why I'm in DC this week, is I'm actually going to a conference tomorrow that deals with digital safety in children. One of the issues that I see that I have deep concern over is the bias that's being introduced through machine learning into our smartphones, into our smart home devices that are being used more and more by children. And kids don't have the ability to discern what is fake news and what is not. Kids don't have the ability to figure out that they're getting a heavily slanted answer. One thing that we know is, like, if you do a Google search and you get a search page with different results, as adults, we can look at the search results and click through and decide, okay, I might have to click to page 4 to get something that's more objective. More and more of us are getting Amazon Dots and Amazon Echoes and Google Home devices in our homes, and kids are starting to use that to ask questions. Now, what's interesting with some of these devices are that they only give you one answer. You ask, Google Home, who is Muhammad? It's going to give you an extremely favorable response of Muhammad. You ask Google Home, who is Jesus Christ? You're going to get a very different answer. Try it for yourself. If you don't believe me, go home and try it if you have one of these devices. Go ask the questions. Who is Donald Trump? Who is Hillary Clinton? You're going to get very interesting results. Very slanted, very biased results. Now, my concern is children are listening to this. Children are getting these answers and they don't know the difference. My big concern is for us to try and keep the bias out of these organizations. Like Pamela said, and I couldn't agree more, the roles of technology companies have changed. When these companies started out in Silicon Valley, there were internet companies. They were, back in 97, there were a bunch of Stanford guys coming up with a search engine. Their roles have changed. They are now media companies. They are telecommunications providers. They are not regulated the same way that these other companies are. Media, newspapers are regulated. Telecommunications providers are regulated. Internet companies are not. That's why they were able to get so big so quickly. People say, well, the free market will take care of it. Why don't we don't need regulation. Well, let me tell you, as a software engineer, it's not that easy to replace them. They've had a 15-year head start. Even if you get VC funding and you try and build the new Twitter, you try and do what Gab is doing now, which is a free speech alternative to Twitter. What they're trying to do, it costs a lot of money and it's not that easy to do. It's not that easy to uncouple your life from Google. You can try and get rid of your Android devices. You can try and stop. You can switch to a different search engine, but it's not that simple for everybody. Google runs a big part of education. It's as an educational platform. A lot of people use Google Cloud for different purposes. So just the bottom line is these companies are a big part of our lives, and we shouldn't have to look for alternatives. We should try and get them to change their ways.
Google search, they worked with Islamic apologists, and they scrubbed all of Google of anything critical of jihad and Sharia. So if you Google jihad or Sharia, you can check. If you Google that, you will get Islamic apologetics. Islam is a religion of peace. I am no way. Remember when you said you were on page, Jihad Watch and I were always on page 1. We are nowhere. I can't even find my own site. If I put in my URL, and they scrubbed 40,000 of my posts. It's Stalin-esque, speaking of which.
Truly. Our final speaker today, thank you, Pamela. Thank you, Marlene, that's great. Is Oleg Atbashian. He's the author, satirist, and graphic artist from the former USSR. His writings present a view of America and the world through the prism of his Soviet experience. The website is thepeoplescube.com. They've also been, which is really shocking, they've also been victims now of the tech companies and how they're cracking down on conservatives. It's stunning. And so here he moved from a Soviet satellite country. Now he's in the U.S. and he's experiencing things we never thought we would see in the United States of America. So we're very pleased. We're glad you made it. Oleg is here to share with us today.
Thank you, Jim. It's an honor to be here. Now get ready for the real accent. Now, yes, I came from the Soviet Union, and Jim mentioned the Voice of America that was broadcasting in different Eastern European languages, the alternative news, and I was one of the listeners. And we found ways, the government was jamming those voices. There was Radio Free Europe, there was the German Wave, there was Voice of America, there was a BBC Russian service, and it wasn't as leftist as it is now. Not the Russian service, but the BBC. And we were listening to many of those, and sometimes the government was jamming those radio voices, and we were sometimes even recording them on the tape recorder, and then comparing different versions with friends, and if those sentences were jammed at different times, then we could compile and put together a more continuous segment. And especially we did that for music programs, because as you may know, rock and roll music was not very welcomed by the Communist Party, and we all listened to rock and roll. And the BBC Russian service had really good music programs, and that's what we recorded and took. But also we got some political messages with that. So now I'm here, and I'm running the People's Cube. It's a satirical website that parodies the left. We kind of pretend to be, it's a game, like a role-playing game, pretend to be the Stalinist Politburo discussing current events from this hardline communist point of view. And a lot of Americans like that. Some don't understand what we're doing, but we have a pretty good following. Now, one of our readers is a military, an army officer who sent me a screenshot recently showing that my website, the People's Cube, is banned on the Department of Defense computers under the category of hate and racism. Now, and I understand that the DoD employees have better things to do with their time than to read silly websites. And, if the category was goofy and silly, I would understand. But the category was hate and racism, and that's a completely different matter. Now, that is so false, that accusation. I won't even waste your time explaining why it's false, but a little later I'll tell you how I was able to beat that block and have it removed. And that's a relevant story to today's debate. Now, when I lived in the Soviet Union, my speech was expected to be blocked, and it was a default setting. There was nothing I could do about the Soviet government. I didn't believe in socialism and collectivism, and so I was doomed to silence, and like I said, there was nothing I could do. But I had assumed at the time that if I were to move to the United States, I would have the freedom of speech and expression, and I would be able to speak without censorship. Now, imagine my surprise. I found out that many in this country, including in education and even in the government, love the ideas of socialism and collectivism that I had escaped from. So I began to satirize the left again, and this time in English, and I launched the People's Cube. That was in 2005. Already in 2006, the People's Cube was banned by Google. We were removed from their search results. The ranking went to 0, and we had a big fight about it. The pretense was ridiculous, but I don't have time to go deep into this. Since then, the site has been blacklisted, shadow banned, suspended, downranked, and otherwise hindered from all directions. We've been purged from Wikipedia. That was a very ugly fight, and long and depressing. Again, some other time I may tell the story, and it's also very relevant to this discussion, but Wikipedia is a whole different matter. It's completely unobjective, and it is filled with radical leftist social justice warriors who are suppressing and distorting the information on Wikipedia. There are 3 biggest online stores, Zazzle, Spreadshirt, and Cafe Press, where we can support ourselves by selling merchandise relevant to our websites. Now, I'm also a graphic artist, so I create designs. All of these big online stores removed my designs with conservative messages, or anti-leftist messages, or anti-Che Guevara messages, where I was making fun of the leftist spirit. We've been slandered by Snopes as a clickbait site. If you are a fact checker and you belong to a mainstream media organization and you go to Snopes, you will see that our site is described as a clickbait site known for spreading malware, which is a complete lie and slander. PolitiFact has put us on their list of fake news sites, along with Gateway Pundit and Breitbart. Facebook is limiting our shares and blocks them as spam. We've been denied ad revenue due to organized campaigns by leftists who write to ad providers. And finally, my wife's contributions to the People's Cube have led to a forced resignation from the job. Of course, this all affected our livelihood and caused us loss of income. And of course, a lot of people, especially libertarians, would tell us that these are all private companies and they have the right to have their own rules. And the conventional wisdom states that the real censorship comes only from the government. It's when the government does it, that's when we're censored. Otherwise, it's not. It's just private companies doing what they want, and they have the right to do that. Now, the Department of Defense is government. So, and if they're blocking me under a ridiculous pretense, then, my comrades, we have a right. So I started digging, and I turned to the internet, and I found out that actually it's not the DoD fault because they were just simply using a private contractor. And the private contractor who maintained their services was internet was also using a database of another private company who, as we're told, have the right to have their own rules and do whatever they want. But now that the private companies and the government companies are merging in this, then the issue of censorship becomes really blurry. And that's where now, just to show how absurd this is, the People's Cube is it's a politically motivated and a site, and yes, we do have an agenda. But here is another example, along with me, from the same reader who reported that the People's Cube was blocked. He also reported there was a Holocaust memorial site dedicated to the victims of Auschwitz that was also blocked for hate and racism on the DoD computers. So I was digging and I was kind of comparing. It helped me to find the source for this when I could look for both websites, and I found a company called BrightCloud, and it creates and maintains a database where it classifies all websites according to different categories, and some categories are philosophy or political activism or news or entertainment. But my site and the Holocaust site were both under the category of hate and racism. So luckily they have a functionality for search, and I suggest that you all find BrightCloud on your computers and try to search for your own websites and see what category it belongs in. And now, I was able to contest that and send them an email, and to my surprise, I got a response. And they reviewed it, and a few days later, they removed those from their search results. My site now is listed as a political activism or something, and the Holocaust site is referenced. So it is possible. And their explanation was that this was just a result of I'm just trying to find their quote. The result of machine learning system based on some common patterns. So that sounds so cool. The machine learning system misclassified me. So I was misclassified by artificial intelligence. And it's like I have seen the future. And it looks like a dystopian sci-fi movie. So at least the Pentagon didn't target me with a drone, and I should be great. But expect those mistakes in the future as these social media companies and tech companies starting to partner with the government to fight hate speech. Now, if you oppose us taking action against these tech giants now, then remember this story when your own site disappeared from the web. But before we even do that, we must go after the hate speech classification, because the best way not to fall into the trap is to remove the trap. And what exactly is hate speech? Hateful rhetoric coming from the left never gets to be branded as hate speech, as we know, nor is it ever blocked on social media. This alone makes hate speech label meaningless and exposes its one-sided agenda. It is nothing but a slur to silence conservatives. No logical argument will convince these hate speech police to give up this power, this tool voluntarily. So we must hit them with a lawsuit. We must do it legislatively. We must confront them. And this whole hate speech gimmick must be outlawed as unconstitutional and an impediment to free exchange of information. I may be going long, so I want to say that an important point that just last summer, the United States Supreme Court unanimously reaffirmed that there is no hate speech exception in the First Amendment. This effectively renders unconstitutional any restriction of speech based on the so-called hate speech allegation. And Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote an explanation, and I want to quote him exactly. A law that can be directed against speech found offensive to some portion of the public can be turned against minority and dissenting views to the detriment of all. The First Amendment does not entrust that power to the government's benevolence. So the Supreme Court agrees the hate speech label is unconstitutional and a deceptive gimmick. And yet it is used to suppress conservative and libertarian speech on social media and in different organizations, and including the Facebook, Google, Twitter search algorithms, or whatever code exists there. So, and it's also used by the speech police in many organizations, schools, and government agencies in violation of the Constitution. Again, the text generates made for private companies, but information is existential value to our society, and it cannot be treated just as a product that they buy and sell and distribute. If it has an existential value, it means that it's like public square, like Pamela said. We have a right to demand that we are being treated fairly, and a good way to go about this is through the Bureau for Consumer Protection, and because their goal is to protect consumers from fraud. And this censorship of conservative speech by social media giants is exactly what it is. It's fraud. It's fraudulent. If a food manufacturer were to label his products the same way as the social media does, and then present something different instead, that food manufacturer would be sued out of existence. But with the information companies, this is not happening. They can do whatever they want. They misrepresent. And and finally, before conservatives are erased from the internet, legal minds in the conservative movement had better select an appropriate case of suppression and stage an exemplary class action lawsuit that would create a seminal precedent for all future cases. And if no legal ground for such a lawsuit exists now, we must work with our legislators to create it. So I couldn't address all the angles of this proposal here, but I've recently published an article in Front Page magazine, and it's also currently at peoplescube.com. It's at the very top of the homepage, so you can read it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we're going to open up to some questions here. You, sir.
Hi, Jack Pasovic, long-time listener, first-time caller. Just wanted to say big thank you to everybody who's here putting together the panel today. You guys are the cutting edge. You're the cutting edge not only in this fight for rights, but a fight for the digital revolution in information democratization that's going on right now. So I applaud your efforts today. My question is, and this is certainly something that's come up a lot recently, is the regulation on some of these big tech companies. What type of regulations would, and sort of an open question for whoever would like to answer, what type of regulations would we be talking about? What would we be looking at in terms of that? Because certainly as people that lean more to the right, more conservative, regulations are not usually something you hear from the conservative sphere. That being said, we find ourselves in a new situation with new infrastructure, new channels of communications, and the laws just don't seem to kind of match up with the system we're using today.
Can I say something? Sure. You know, they broke up Ma Bell, right? It was a communications company. They broke up Ma Bell, and ironically, the CEO of Ma Bell, which became AT&T, has proposed an Internet Bill of Rights. Randall Stevenson, and I'm going to quote, yes? He said that the Internet Bill of Rights would subject Facebook, Google, and other content providers to rules that would prevent unfair censoring on Internet service providers. Quote, congressional action is needed to establish an Internet Bill of Rights that applies to all Internet companies and guarantees neutrality, transparency, openness, non-discrimination, and privacy protection for all Internet users. Boom. I don't want their money. Listen, I'm a capitalist. I always hated antitrust. I don't believe in it at all. This is the one case where this is the public square, and it's government sanctioned. There's a government sanction of the censorship. I don't think it contradicts with anything that is in our constitutional rights. I think it fits right in.
Thanks, Pam.
I have.
Could I add one thing, and then to Oleg? I think another thing too is right now there's no transparency. A couple weeks ago, Facebook announced that they're going to change their algorithms, and so several sites could expect different results. They've done this in the past. Sometimes they've announced it. Sometimes it just hit us, and we just noticed that things changed.
Right.
And I can tell you that every time they made a change, our traffic from Facebook went down. And again, we're a website, Gateway Pundit, where our traffic is going up each month, but our Facebook traffic continues to take these hits every couple months. So I also know, because we spoke with our advertisers, and we said, so you're seeing this on all sites. Some of our advertisers work with conservatives and liberal sites. So we asked them, you're seeing this on all sites? And they're saying, no, we're only seeing this on conservative sites.
Right.
The liberal sites, their traffic and the money they make continues to grow. So what we need is, what Pamela said, is we need some sort of act or rules, but we also need these tech giants. We just need transparency. Just show how we're doing, and show how these other people are doing too. Because we don't know. We don't know if it's all hidden today. Their algorithms are hidden. Their results are hidden. And so to make it fair, the left likes to talk about how they want justice and fairness, and we all want that. Just make it transparent.
If I can add on to one thing that I think is also extremely important is that adds on to the transparency is we need to know what they're doing with data that they're collecting from us. Because they're collecting an enormous amount of data, and what people need to understand is you are the product. They own the data, and they don't tell you what they're doing with it. They're sharing it with other providers. Facebook and Google and Twitter, they all share data with each other. The example that I like to give people is if you compare the enormous impact that the hacking attempt, or at least the hacking at Equifax had, that data source that got compromised, if you were to cross-reference that with data that can be taken from Google, you have an incredibly detailed profile on somebody's life. And we don't know what they're doing with the data. And I think there's now some of the there's one attorney general, I believe, I think it's in Missouri, who's actually now starting to hold Google responsible, or accountable for telling people, consumers, what they're doing with the data and exactly how it will be used. And I think that's something we need at on a national level, is they need to tell consumers what they collect, how the data will be used.
All right. I have a comment here. Of course, this is a very slippery slope, and we don't want, as conservatives and libertarians, we oppose government intervention into business, and we don't want them to do something that they don't want to do. But what we want, the government has the right, and we want to make those companies not do certain things. It's not like the negative bill of rights. The negative rights are in the Constitution. You do not censor. Actually, it will cost those companies less money not to do these things. So it's not. We're not forcing them to do things that they don't like. Now, we repealed net neutrality because we don't want the FCC to treat the web like a public utility, which then would subject information to government censorship, because then the government, as a public utility, the government will have the right to regulate free speech, and that's a very slippery slope. But in contrast, if we go through the Bureau of Consumer Protection, then it would treat the internet as a marketplace where information will be treated as any commercial product, and it needs to be protected from fraud. Let me read here. The Bureau of Consumer Protection has a stated goal to stop unfair and deceptive and fraudulent business practices. And that is what is happening right now with the social media. These are deceptive business practices that we can address through a lawsuit, through this Bureau of Consumer Protection.
Thank you, Ole.
So we have time for one more question.
Again, I want to thank you guys so much for doing this, and I want you to know that the shadow banning panel is being shadow banned right now. I just got a message from one of my good friends at Overpasses for America, a site that has over 100,000 viewers. The more he has shared this, the lower the viewer numbers have gone down. So we're actually experiencing it live right now. My question is, I have noticed that actually my viewers are also ultimately being targeted by share bans. They're blocked from sharing to pages by sharing my page. And that attack that is against us, media individuals, is actually being passed onto viewers. I know even personally in my own life, my husband, who doesn't do any social media, his business, our business, was attacked by refusefascism.org after I started doing Trump Talk US. We were actually forced to close our business due to that. So we've already reached Kristallnacht at this point. I mean, I feel like we've already gotten to the point where we are, it's not just endangering to ourselves, but we see that risk to even the people who are trying to consume the media. And we see connections with radical groups such as Antifa and other leftist, terrorist, domestic groups. What is your experience with that? And are there ways that we can go after perhaps criminal connections with these terrorist groups in these organizations? And what are you experiencing as far as your viewers are concerned with them getting attacked?
Well, my Facebook followers are I must get at least 20 emails a day. I tell everyone to take screenshots. Everybody wants to join the lawsuit. Put me on your lawsuit. And of course it's tricky because these silicon companies are in California where they have SLAPP. Mm-hmm. And so if I lost, I would be responsible for their legal bills. I mean, they could literally destroy you. And as I said, I understand when you click that box where you were saying you agree to terms of service. I understand that whole legal argument, but to your point, we are being targeted. And this is not the second, this is not the 8th, this is not the 10th. This is the First Amendment. And it's first for a reason. It protects all speech, most specifically political speech, because then who's going to decide what's good and what's forbidden? The government, Mark Zuckerberg, CAP, okay? I mean, so my people are targeted. They're constantly being put in Facebook jail. And the worse it gets, the worse they get. They continue to act with, absolute impunity. And we need some government, legislation. She brings up all the data that they're collecting. So let's understand this. They're collecting all this data, making an enormous amount of money, almost, incomprehensible. And you're silencing us? You're getting rich off us, and you're silencing us? I don't know who's going to carry the ball on this, but I believe, like with President Trump, he listens. He listens to his base. He does. And I think if we can move this ball, as I said, build this coalition. And we all owe Jim an enormous amount of gratitude and thanks for organizing this, because we can't, we're letting it happen at this point. It's not too late. We need antitrust enforcers to move the ball on this. Absolutely.
If I could just reply to your point, when you were saying sharing aspects of where you have people that belong to a specific group, we knew in 2013 and 2014 the IRS was doing this. They would find a Tea Party group on Facebook. They were sharing posts that were very pro-Tea Party. We knew that the IRS would then go and try to find out where they were getting their money, and they would face an audit. The shift has moved. The policing now, we always knew that these tech companies were policing. We didn't know what they were doing with the data. We knew that they were collecting it. We knew that telecom giants were collecting it. And when Ola was speaking, I kept thinking of this, in Moscow they have something called the House of the Embankment. It's an apartment building now. It used to be, when Stalin was empowered to put his friends in the house of reenactment, and the walls were constantly listening to you. And if someone said something that he didn't like, they were quietly removed. And I think that the strength comes from a discussion like this. We all know that we want to do something about it. Yes, lawsuits are great. Yes, regulation is great. But the strength comes in banding and the number and not being an individual targeted. And the best way to combat this, and I love the fact that everybody on this panel, they seem like a reporter to me. And you know, I used to be really shy. I love these issues so much. I kind of have to break through that sometimes to talk about them. But the best thing that we can do is to continue to share it and to speak out, to speak out, to speak out. And I'm hoping that Jim makes headway with a subcommittee hearing, getting this before Congress, because they're not going to be able to ignore it. And this issue is largely ignored. But I think part of our strength is just in our numbers.
I completely agree with that. I think that a big part of it is continuing to talk, because the analogy that I like to use is with shadow banning especially, it's what the excuse that the tech companies hide behind is like, well, we're not infringing on your free speech. We're allowing you to speak. Well, what they're doing is they're just taking away your audience. So you're shouting into the abyss. And as long as you think that you're by yourself, you stop speaking. And to me, the answer is we just need to keep shouting, because they can't ban us all. They can't shadow ban everybody. Just keep talking and keep documenting and keep reporting and sharing with people their experiences, because what you're saying as far as your groups being targeted, that is absolutely true. Twitter has, when they announced the changes to their user terms of service in December, they announced that they're now doing, they're tracking you off their platform. It's not that difficult to do. They use your IP address. They monitor your behavior on all other social media platforms. They can use the location devices on your phone to let you know, and they can monitor where you are in real life. And based on that, they know who your followers are, who you follow. So they have huge groups of people that they can easily target and easily track. And the key thing is just to keep talking and to share experiences, because in the end, if there really is strength in numbers, and people can deny what's happening if there's enough stories coming out.
And we will win. Oh, that's the Supreme Court case that you cited, where hate speech, I mean, it's purely subjective, My organization was involved in that lawsuit because I had tried to trademark one of my groups to stop Islamization of America. And I was denied that trademark because they said it was disparaging. That it was disparaging to Muslims. And there was another group, the Slants, an Asian group, an Asian rock group, who called themselves the Slants. And they said they couldn't have their trademark but they're Asian. They're calling themselves the Slants, whatever. And then, of course, the Redskins, as you know. But since 2009, we've been fighting that. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And just right before I came to D.C., I got my little trademark certificate. SIA, Stop Islamization of America, is now a designated trademark. You will win. We will win. But you can't, one thing about the left you have to admire, they never get tired. No matter how much they lose, they never stop. It's sort of, it's this kind of, it's an ADD, it's a kind of craziness. We can learn from that. We can learn from that craziness.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, that does conclude our event today. I want to thank our incredible panelists for offering their insight. Wonderful.
Introduce them by name one more time.
Okay, we got Oleg, Jim, Marianne, Pam, Marlene.
Wonderful.
Margaret, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.